Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. Charlotte Mayor Vi Lyles is back with us this hour for her regular visit, and because it's budget time, she has brought along City Manager Marcus Jones. We'll be talking about that budget and other things as well. Welcome back, Mayor.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here, Mike.
And good to see you too, Marcus. Welcome back.
Good to be back again.
If you'd like to join our conversation, you can email us at charlottetalks@wfae.org. Get to us through Facebook or Twitter at Charlotte Talks. You can also watch us this morning on Facebook Live. City Manager presented the budget for the next fiscal year to City Council on Monday night. How does this process work? Do you work blindly, just putting together this budget and then present it to council, or are you in conference and meetings beforehand?
Yeah, it's very interesting, Mike. If you start to think about a budget process, people sometimes think about it being introduced in May and voted on in June, and think about it as maybe 6 weeks. It is 365 days a year. Matter of fact, after council approved last year's budget, the next day we started to talk about public safety pay plan. So it's continuous, much public engagement, much public input, and we use a lot of information from the annual retreat from council, and we try to put together a budget that's reflective of that input.
So does council talk to Marcus Jones individually, collectively? How does that work, Mayor?
Both. I think that if you have a hallway conversation, it's just as valuable as having one in the chamber or at just a regular meeting. I think the most important part of what Marcus has to do is to capture the common themes that we want to approach, and we continue to look at economic opportunity in the city this year. Last year, our focus was on affordable housing, $50 million. Thank you to all of the voters for doing that. And the budget recommendation is that in 2020 we do an additional $50 million. So we continue to work around affordable housing. But this year we have to do more. You know, you can have a great place to live, a great neighborhood, but you have to have work. And so the focus this year for the council as a policy is how do we create economic opportunity? And at the same time, how do we manage a government that's the size of ours with over 8,000 employees that are out there every day working? So Marcus has a lot of hallway conversations, group conversations. He's got to talk to those employees. He's got to agree with the council priorities. And this budget accomplishes all of that.
How big is this budget, and how does it compare to previous budgets?
So the overall budget is about $2.6 billion, slightly down from last year overall because it was a bond year.
Okay.
In terms of the general fund, which many people focus on because that's the real estate tax, sales tax, fees, it's $728 million, which is about 4.4% higher than last year.
So you said it's slightly lower this year because last year was a bond year. What does that mean? Because the bonds may not have passed. They did, but they may not have. And the bonds, as I understand it, are funded differently than the rest of the government, right?
Yeah, so a great question. So when I talk about a $2.6 billion budget, as a matter of fact, the general fund grew by 4.8%, but the $2.6 billion budget is everything. It's water, it's our cats, it's stormwater, so it's the airport, all of those. And you also add to it what would be the total bonds, and you get the overall financial picture of the city. But again, many times we focus on the general fund that does not include those enterprise funds, and that grew by 4.8%, a little bit over $33 million.
What's an enterprise fund?
So enterprise fund, basically the fees pay for the service. So if we are thinking about water on your bill, there's a fee associated with
Boy,
water.
is there.
What's that?
Boy, is there.
Yeah. I walked into that one. Okay. So, and that fee covers.
I think you should try aviation. That might be one that people better understand.
Right, the airport, right. So the airport, if you start to think about that, all the fees that you pay for your tickets are covered. The service, yes.
As you put together this budget, I'm sure you were certainly aware that this is one of those property revaluation years, and in the 7 years since the last revaluation, home prices, home values, land prices, land values have climbed precipitously, and that most real estate around is going to be appraised at a higher rate. Therefore, property taxes on that real estate would go up. You have brought this tax, this budget in at a revenue neutral rate, meaning that even if your property is worth more, you may not be paying any more. You may, but you may not be paying more because of the way you set the millage rate. Was that what you were striving to do?
Absolutely.
Why?
So,
County didn't do it. Why did you?
well, we started at the end of January at the retreat, and we have a great team from the budget office, the finance office, all of the team members, 8,000 of us. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the retreat, I said that we would strive for a 2020 budget that is revenue neutral. And I think half of my staff gasped for air because we left the retreat actually being down $4.5 million. And by the time we got back to Charlotte, we were down $7 million, a gap between the revenue coming in and what we knew as the known expenditures. Yeah. But what we said was we had preliminary data that suggested that our overall tax base would grow by 40%, so from $100 billion to $140 billion, with just residential increasing by about 48%. So with that in the front of our minds, we went back and started to think, how can we deliver the same level of service for no additional funds? We actually continued to streamline our operations, saved about $5.5 million, consolidated some departments. So there was almost never a discussion about going higher than the revenue neutral rate. And with everybody in lockstep, it became easier.
Now, Marcus Jones is not a politician. He will be here long after City Council comes and goes.
Please watch that now.
Was this a mandate from Council to please try to do what you can to bring this in at revenue neutral, or was this entirely up to him?
I think that Marcus has a great understanding of this community. He's out and about talking to people all of the time. We have lots of citizen engagement. So we're not far apart when we come to this. And basically, I think that this community expected with the growth and the development that we shouldn't have an increase in our taxes. And I think that everyone agreed with that. Yeah. We have had, as Marcus said, the value in our assessment. I remember a headline said, "City no revenue neutral tax rate, but some will pay more." But some will pay more is prescribed by state law to bring in balance our system of who pays for government. With all of our growth, we wanted to be in balance, but we did not want to go beyond that. We did what we thought the city would expect of us, our citizens, and we build for the growth, we attract the growth. We ought to make sure everyone benefits from it, and that means keeping the tax rate revenue neutral.
And as the mayor said at the very beginning of our conversation, the city is very focused on affordable housing, and if you raise the tax rate, housing becomes less affordable.
That's true.
You were particularly, I think, Marcus, worried about longtime homeowners in areas where property values increased significantly. Where are those areas, and why are they going up more than perhaps other areas of town?
So we noticed that there were a number of areas that were in uptown close to light rail. And some of those neighborhoods were, I guess the best way to say it is, on the verge of gentrification. Mm-hmm. So when we looked at some of the programs in this budget, such as naturally occurring affordable housing, in other words, were there opportunities for us to make sure that people can age in place? We've set aside $1.5 million for those individuals 65 years and older and who've lived in their homes for more than 5 years and would not qualify for the county program to have up to a $1,000 grant to help them. And also we have a new program where we will partner with some of the other agencies and actually purchase homes and keep those homes affordable for individuals who are 110% AMI or below. We think that's the innovation that we need to do in terms of trying to tackle this problem.
Now, the county was not able to keep their tax rate revenue neutral, and we're going to have Dina DiOrio, the county manager, on this program on Tuesday to talk about the county's point of view on this. Before we talk about how you were able to do this and they weren't, talk to me about the services that the city provides versus the county, because people get this very confused. They think you're all one and the same. Yeah. They think that you guys do this, and in fact the county does it, and the other way around. So what does the city do?
I look at it very simply. The general fund pays for those
Are you
daily.
in charge of these sirens, by the way?
I think that's a safety issue, and they're going about making our community safe.
Okay,
So
all right.
that's it. But we pay in the general fund primarily police, and it's our largest expense from your taxes. Fire, the second largest expense. And then we have two other major services, transportation, the people that make sure our streets are drivable. That might be questionable right now with all the growth going on, but making sure the signals work. And then finally, we our solid waste services. We collect our waste, we dispose of it, working with the county at their landfills. So those four areas are the things that I think people see as basic services, and that's what the city does.
And the county does what?
Well, the county actually has I think what I would call the welfare of the community. So, in terms of public health, in terms of social services, in terms of having safe buildings, a large part of what they do is making sure buildings are permitted appropriately for safety reasons, not just because we want to build something, but I think they would be looked at more as how do they care for the overall community's health and welfare.
So county property taxes are likely to go up on most people. I think on average it's about $9 a month. Was that part of, they made their announcement first about their budget and about their changing of what property taxes were going to be. Did that factor at all into your attempts to keep yours neutral?
Absolutely not. As mentioned earlier, back in January, we had that commitment to have a revenue neutral budget.
So let's be clear about this. County property taxes will rise 43% on average for residential property, 77% for commercial property. You're saying that you're keeping yours at zero or close to it? No change?
No, the way that this works, Mike, is that we have a reval that occurs, and then there is a way to set your tax rate to make sure that you collect no more than you would collect in a typical year.
Right.
So what we did is we took our tax rate, which was basically at 48.87, and we reduced it to 34.81, which is 14 points lower.
Right.
And when you apply that to this new base, it basically means that you would collect the same revenue that we would have collected in FY19.
Right. So isn't that a zero-sum game?
Well, you get a little bit of growth. The natural growth that we would get is about 2.5%. But when you start to think about it on an individual level, if someone's house increased by, let's say, 200%, even if I lower this from 48.87 to 34.81, that person may still pay more in taxes.
So this property tax rate of 34.81 cents per $100 valuation of your house or property is the lowest in 50 years. And yet the general fund budget is growing by 5%, just under $728 million, and the total budget is going to $2.6, as we said, billion over the next year. When we have to take a break in 25 seconds, so this is an unfair question to ask in that amount of time. So I'll just throw the question out. You can stew in it for a while, and then we'll come back after the break and get an answer. How do you do that? How do you have the lowest valuation in 50 years and still more money coming into the fund and keep our property taxes generally neutral? We'll come back and get an answer from Marcus Jones. He's the city manager. Charlamagne Vi Lyles is also with us at Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Duke Energy, working to add 100% more solar power on the Carolinas energy grid in the next 5 years. Information online, duke-energy.com/getmorefacts. And Live Nation presenting Trevor Noah's Loud and Clear Tour Saturday, September 14th at Spectrum Center in Charlotte. Tickets available Friday, 10 a.m. at livenation.com. Zoning is a product of the 20th century that resulted in certain kinds of homes and businesses being allowed in certain areas, but it also resulted in segregation and the erecting of impediments to racial equality and upward mobility. Now, Charlotte is considering a bold and to some controversial idea to address that, and we'll hear about this proposal to undo the legacy of housing segregation tomorrow on this program at 9.
towns up and down the Mississippi River are flooding. For many, this is just the latest in a string of back-to-back so-called 1-in-100-year floods.
Well, I think the use of this 1 in 100 year and 1 in 500 year is confusing to people.
I'm Ari Shapiro, looking for better ways to communicate flood risk this afternoon on All Things Considered from NPR News.
All Things Considered from 4 to 6:30 on 90.7 WFAE.
And rehearsal might do that.
Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We're having a lovely conversation off the air that doesn't seem to stop. It just segues into the show. Charlotte Mayor Vi Lyles is with us. Marcus Jones, the city manager, is also here. So, getting back to the budget, the property tax rate is the lowest it's been in 50 years under this new budget, and yet the general fund budget is growing by 5%. Other things are going up. How do you do that and not raise taxes? Is it simply more people moving in, buying more property, the property values of those new residents have increased because a house is where a piece of land just by itself used to be? How does that work?
Are you trying to take my job, Mike? That's exactly right. So what we're seeing is that this tremendous growth in the city, getting 2.5% of that growth is still helping us. And it's not just real estate tax. There's so many other taxes that we collect, so many other taxes and fees. So that overall growth of the city is reflected in our revenue stream.
Now, the city of Charlotte takes up most, not all, but most of the landmass of Mecklenburg County. Mm-hmm. How were you able to do this without raising taxes and the county wasn't? Because, I mean, if you're growing, so are they.
Well, I think one thing that's extremely important is, and I'm going to always go back to the retreat, the council back in January said these are 4 things that are important to us, the council. Well-managed government. Marcus makes sure that the trains run on time and that you are operating as efficiently and effectively as you can. Then there is transportation and planning, neighborhood development, and economic development. And because we had just those 4 areas to focus on, we're able to take our resources and plow them into those 4 areas. Yeah. If there were 20 areas, we may not be having the same conversation.
Okay. And as I said, Dina DiOrio, who is the county manager, will join us next Tuesday to talk about the county side of this. I think, Mike,
Marcus isn't giving the Team Charlotte a sufficient shout-out, and this is what I would say. Marcus has committees with employees, and he meets regularly with them, and compensation is a large part of what we do. Mm-hmm. And if you look at over 50% of the general fund are with our firefighters and our police officers. He's been working all year to think about how do we do that. And, last year we gave a major bump to our police officers. This year we're continuing to do that to deal with issues both around recruitment and retention of that. And our fire department, again, trying to make sure we have sufficient coverage, adding the crews that are necessary. So Charlotte has always been a place where we've looked at things to say, what are we doing and how do we do it best? Mm-hmm. And how do we do it at a cost that's affordable for everyone to live here? And I think that saying that and saying it consistently, it gets into the water. It's about what our community understands, and our employees are part of this community. So when we talk about the impact of a homeowner, I think about the guy that works in our solid waste department that came up to me and he says, Mayor, I'm looking for a place to live. How do I get that? And so we've got to look at that. And the dollar increase to take every employee in our city to have a minimum living wage of $16 an hour is an important commitment to the fabric of what we see as economic opportunity for our city.
Well, let's talk about that. You just said, but you're suggesting, this budget suggests $1 per hour raise for the lowest earning city employees, taking them to $16 an hour. That's a $2,000 a year raise for hourly employees, if I'm not mistaken. Are these workers in general or mostly police and fire employees?
So these individuals are in general, and as the mayor mentioned earlier, so police and fire, and they would enjoy hearing me say this, are in a step system that's very important to them. And the concept is you do your job, you work hard, the next year you get this automatic increase, whether it's 2.5%, 5%. And what we did this year, understanding that we were having a difficult time with retention of police officers, we just had a survey of 20 cities across the country, not just the southeastern part of the United States where we fare very well, but across the country. And we found out that our top pay was not at the national median. So what we did is have a 2-year plan for police, a 3-year plan for fire to get us up to the national median. And for police, that basically means that the highest pay in 2 years will increase by 10%. And that's important for police officers, sergeants, and the whole team. In terms of general fund employees, that $1 an hour, typically what we would have done is a 3% salary increase. So applying 3% to someone who makes $15 an hour is something a little bit above $900 a year. And we're thinking about upward mobility in our organization. So the lowest paid employees will get a higher percentage increase than the highest paid employees. So in other words, if you make something less than $69,333 a year, that $1 an hour impact will give you something higher than that 3%. Our lowest paid employee will get close to 6.9%.
Is this $1 an hour increase for these hourly employees, is that in addition to, or is that part of the $18 million in additional funds to bring police pay up to the national standard?
Two separate things. So
Separate
the police piece is in that step system,
Okay.
and our general fund employees is in our non-public safety system.
So you're also suggesting an additional $2 million next year and an additional $1 million in 2021 to accelerate public safety training for police. What impact would that have, both the training and the impact of that money on the budget?
Right, so the $3 million over, and I would say over 366 days, because that $1 million in FY 2021 would be available on July 1, is really to make sure that our first responders have all of the training necessary for them to have a positive impact in our community. So that is outside of the police budget, outside of the fire budget. We're holding that centrally so that there isn't an issue about police or fire going over their budgets in order to provide this training. I'm very pleased that Chief Putney is helping lead the charge to make sure that all of our police officers are getting the adequate training, whether it is the crisis intervention team training or just training that deals with being able to work within communities. That's important to us.
And go ahead.
I just feel that we have to be nimble, and we have to be able to adjust to what the community needs are. And of course, the Aquarius Franklin incident or officer-involved shooting was something that we really had to deal with. And when we talk about saying, well, we're doing de-escalation training, we had the curriculum. Did we have enough people moving through that curriculum fast enough to be able to assess it in the community and for the officers to be able to be in a position that they have the training to do that? And when Chief Putney said, this is what we're going to do, we need to do it faster, and we need to do it better. And he's focused on that. And I want to say, every time we have an incident, we're going to learn more about how it's managed. And we're going to always assess and analyze and correct. And those corrections may be innovations or it may be catching up. Marcus has said that this money is going to be available to get our officers through the training academy in a way that we can say to the community, not only is this in the curriculum, but it's something that every officer has been trained in, particularly around de-escalation, because you know what's going on in our city. We all do. And we have to make sure our officers are prepared. And this is, I think, just like the money that we do or propose to work with grassroots community organizations around community safety, this is to make sure our officers have community safety priorities.
You brought up water and water fees, Marcus. They're increasing by 3.4%, or about $2.21 a month. And residents will pay $12 more per year in solid waste fees. Taxes may not be going up, but aren't these taxes in by another name?
No.
Okay.
So as we talked about
I'll take you at face value on that.
So let's start off with water. So water, again, much like the better example, as the mayor said earlier, the airport, those fees pay for a service, and this is a service that goes beyond the city of Charlotte. So the ratepayers are getting a service. And we also have to remember that there's a great deal of infrastructure that's going in the ground, and the water fund has to pay for that, much like we have in our capital investment fund over 20-year periods. The solid waste fee is interesting this year because we looked at this a different way, and that is we know what's happening with recycling around the world. We understand that that will be a challenge moving forward. So what we did with this $1 a month fee increase is capture all the costs associated with our tip fee, as well as any additional staff and any additional trucks that would provide the service to this growing community.
You're referencing the fact that it's hard to sell recycled material now?
Yes.
Because there's so much of it? No one wants it?
Well, it's interesting. It's people want it, but they want it to be clean. So what's happening if we did an audit of even, I'm going to get in trouble with my wife, even my own recycling, I'm not sure that I would pass the test, okay? So what we are
Are you putting pizza boxes in?
What's even worse, are you heating things on a piece of aluminum foil and then putting it in the recycling?
Right, okay.
Oh, my gosh.
I'm sorry, Jill. That's my wife. So what we're doing is we're using the innovation barn to think about this differently. We have about 100 million tons of stuff that goes into our landfill every year, and we only divert about 14% of it. If we can divert more and we can have a clean waste stream that's available for recycling, it would be purchased on the open market. So we believe that just this innovation barn in and of itself is something different in the United States that a lot of other cities are going to learn from us.
So a couple of months ago, Mayor, we talked a lot about this sudden revelation that the Cross Charlotte Trail was discovered to be $77 million short of funding. It was a surprise to council. It had been, I think, been the result of previous management and how they budgeted certain things or how they projected the costs on future projects unfolding. But the 2020 budget is now supplying $54 million to the trail. That makes it now $23 million short of full funding. And it leaves...
Mike, I think that we really need to dive into that a little bit more. The $23 million has never even been assessed or planned, or it's just a number. And you know, and I don't want to say anything about prior management because I think people deal with the data that they have. But you just think about how the ability to do things today, even just 2 years ago, the geography, all of the mapping and things like that. But I think what we've begun to deal with is understanding how much we can do and what we have left to plan. So we don't know what that number is because we haven't done an estimate. And we will do that estimate. But I want to say the Charlotte Trail is going to be alive and well with this $54 million commitment. And I'm really proud that we are able to come to the community and say, this is going to happen now.
So help me to understand this. So the $77 million figure was not a set in stone figure. We're not really $77 million short because we didn't know what it was going to cost.
We know
so
the
parts.
parts.
54 and the 77 are equal.
The $54 million is what we know that we can accomplish with the plans that we have. There is a segment further to the north that needs to be planned, and the budget includes $2 million to get those estimates ready for us. So we're going to continue to work on this. But imagine we went from, oh my gosh, we can't do anything, to almost $55 million, and planning for the remainder so we have a real number to deal with next year. Silence is not good on the radio.
No,
Mike.
it's not. It's not good. I'm just trying to.
I hope you're impressed.
I am. Well, I'm processing. Because to me, 77 minus 54 is 23.
If the 77 was ever correct.
Correct.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
So I know this, and this is a little off topic, but I know that you're in the middle, Marcus, of efforts to revamp how cost estimates are calculated, and the reason we're in trouble with this maybe or maybe not $77 million is because of the way costs were calculated in the golden days of yesteryear. What would the new process be like, and when will it be in place?
So the new process is in place now, and as the mayor alluded to earlier, The $77 million, for the most part, was calculated off of the old process. And I will tell you, so the last two segments, 10 and 11, there are no designs. There's not a piece of paper in the government center that could tell us anything about that. It was just a 19 million, I would say, swag. So why would we take those last two segment numbers, whatever they are, and use them at all? So in this planning fund, we're actually going to design the last two segments. The great news is segments 1 through 9, there's enough dollars to fund them all right now. Let's get the design work done. Let's start building.
Okay. The voters just passed, as you've said earlier in the program, Mayor, a $50 million affordable housing package in November. You're proposing another $50 million bond in 2020. That's twice the amount of an earlier recommendation. If passed, I'm math challenged, as is clear here this morning, but if passed, that would mean $100 million, because 50 plus 50 equals 100.
I don't think you're that math challenged.
$100 million in affordable housing bond money. What would that result in if that additional 50 comes into being?
Well, next year, I think we'll have a little bit more of an idea of what we can actually get off the ground and what we can acquire in naturally occurring affordable housing. The dimensions that we've added is the idea that we purchase homes, that we can keep people in their homes longer, and we can figure out a strategy around that, particularly in the inner city where we're seeing gentrification occurring. And then the other thing is that rehabilitation of those homes as well, very important. You can be living in a place where the land has valued increase has been double digits, but your home may be worth very little just because, you know, how difficult it is to get a contractor and maintain it. So we're going to be doing an increased rehabilitation in those areas and neighborhoods. And all of this housing is about the idea that everyone should be able to live in our city in a neighborhood that they can be proud of. It doesn't have to mean that they have big houses or expensive houses. It's just being able to say you have a home. And I think that that's the principle we're using.
Dave on Twitter writes, I'm curious why the city shoulders such a large burden with our affordable housing situation. Isn't this a business issue? At what point do we hold developers and out-of-state real estate firms accountable instead of letting them skirt by on market principles?
Well, I'm not going to go into the discussion on the market principles, but what I would say is that we do have developers working with us. If you look at our plan to have this $50 million and the additional money that would happen in the future, the private sector has stepped up and matched that amount. In fact, they've exceeded when you look at everything that they've done in land contributions in terms of low-interest loan financing, all of those things. So when we say we're looking at affordable housing, government has always had a role in it. It's naive to say it's market versus when the Treasury Department actually sets rules for home lending and mortgages. So we're working around what the traditions have been to make sure everyone can live here.
We have to take a break. Mayor Vi Lyles is with us, so is City Manager Marcus Jones. We will continue our conversation with both of them. Many other topics to go into in the final segment of this program, and we'll do that when we come back from the break. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina, working every day to help improve health care, the patient experience, and cost transparency. More at todaywe.com. And imagery by Lennar, a new active adult community on Mountain Island Lake offering resort-style amenities and Lennar's Everything's Included homes. Details at lennar.com/imagery. Alex Jones of InfoWars Live has a very powerful fan, President Donald Trump. What impact has Alex Jones had on the president? How much does he matter? And what role have the conspiracy theories he's promulgated played in national politics? Joshua Johnson and a panel will talk about that coming up in 20 minutes at 10 o'clock on 1A. And we will continue our conversation with Mayor Vi Lyles in just a moment. Stay with us.
It's your world. We help you explore it.
We're closely following events in Venezuela where the political crisis there has suddenly escalated.
It's your community. We help you understand it.
UNC Charlotte cannot be and will not be defined by this tragedy.
WFAE's Morning Edition is an essential way to start your day and stay connected to your world. Listen weekday mornings from 5 to 9 on 90.7 WFAE.
It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We've been spending most of our time talking here with Mayor Vi Lyles and City Manager Marcus Jones about the budget, which was released to City Council this week. It is the lowest. It features the lowest property tax value. Is that right? Rate in the last 50 years. Essentially revenue neutral, and yet it also offers raises and all kinds of things for projects. So what are we losing? Because there's only so much money in the pot. So if we're keeping things revenue neutral and we're spending more because of pay raises and other things, what are we cutting back on? Anything?
I would commend the team for streamlining services and being able to deliver the same level of services, and sometimes even better, with the resources that we have. And I would hope that is what the council wants and the residents want. They would love for an organization to be run efficiently and effectively, and I'm very proud of the team.
How long can you do that? Because that's like squeezing the turnip for every bit of moisture there is in the turnip. How long can you do that before you just can't cut or streamline or become more efficient anymore?
Well, we know that even in the 2020 budget that we are looking at our operations. We started off internally and with finance and procurement and IT and HR, and now we are taking this to our external operations. So we believe we have continuous improvement is what we call it. So there's always an opportunity to improve.
And Mayor, you've said that this budget aligns with the city's goals to be more inclusive and more equitable. How so?
Yes. I think the efforts that we're trying to do to engage people around their neighborhoods, whether it's safety, additional tree planting, maintaining our tree canopy, all of those things I think are the efforts that the community has stated we want to see. And we've adopted them as our priorities, and this budget reflects those priorities.
We're going to switch gears here for a little bit for the remainder of the program. Last week, there was that tragic shooting at UNC Charlotte. 2 students lost their lives. 4 more were wounded, and those 2 students who lost their lives, unfortunately, are added to Charlotte's rising death toll from homicides. Do you see a difference between what occurred at UNC Charlotte last week and those that have been occurring randomly around the city?
I don't know that there's a difference, but I want to say a couple of things about the UNC Charlotte shooting. It was an active shooting situation where we have, thousands of students on that campus. And when this occurred, we know the heroic efforts of Raleigh, and we know that that was a classroom filled with people. What I would say is that when this happened, I remember very clearly I was in the government center at a reception for small businesses, and someone said, "You need to go upstairs." I got upstairs and turned on the television and immediately talked to the chief of staff for the chancellor, who was in Raleigh. The chancellor was on an airplane going to a meeting in Indianapolis, and I immediately called the governor because this is our university. It's a part of our state system, and he said, Governor Cooper said, "What do you need?" I said, "We need you to come here," and he did. The chancellor and he got back into town by 10 o'clock, and I have to say about the efforts, you can just feel the rawness of this killing. So what's different? One, you have a potential for massive loss of life, except for the students in that classroom, the UNC Charlotte Police Department. Those things could have resulted in more losses of life than we would have ever had experienced. But at the same time, Mike, the violence that's going on, I have to say I've really been dealing with this. It's one of those things that truly does. Someone asked me what keeps me up at night, and the violence that's going on in the city right now is what has been keeping me up at night. So we're beginning to lay out a plan here where we want to take a 3-prong approach to violence. The first thing we want to do is analyze the homicide cases that have been taking place in our city for the last 3 years and look at those in a way that gives us data around them. I always say when something happens, you go back and look and say, what can I do differently to make a better outcome? And we have to go back and do some different looks, because we have a police report, but that doesn't tell the story of why this violence occurs. And if we're going to have safe neighborhoods, we have to know more. So I'm hoping that we'll work with an analysis that helps us note the trends. The second thing that I think is very important is to go out where these homicides have occurred and begin to work with the neighborhood leaders. And I would like to see an action group of our own citizens talking to our own citizens to say, what happened? What do we know about this household that caused this to take place, or this neighborhood or this community? And then just say, figure out, what do we need to do differently? We're not alone in this. There are other cities going through this. But we, in Charlotte, we're not going to give up our streets to violence. We're going to change that dynamic in any way that we can, and it is not about just police. Police are doing a great job. A number of those homicides have been solved. I think out of 32, 29 have been cleared so far. So we know what's going on in terms of the end. What we don't know is what caused it to begin to escalate to the loss of a life. So there's a difference, but in the outcome the same. Loss of life is always going to be that. And if you sit every day and go through the city, if you sit on Monday nights and see the people that come down and ask, what is our city about? It's really about caring for each other. And when we stop doing that, we have to remind ourselves and go back and figure out how to approach it differently so that we do get that caring back.
The police chief has said he's had difficulty investigating some of these shootings because people will not come forward in the community. He needs them to come forward. They need to cooperate, and nobody wants to be a snitch, essentially, is what it amounts to. And that is a question of trust in many cases. What will it take to build trust?
You know, we've had meetings with community groups that are very grassroots and on the street talking about this issue. And what they've said is, you need to work with us more. You need to give us more capacity and more opportunity to do what we're doing, because where the chief may not, or the detective or the officer may not be able to approach someone, maybe there's someone in that neighborhood that could. And so we've included in this year a plan to work with grassroots groups to build that trust at that level. And hopefully trust is something, it's an investment. It's an investment in both people, and it's an investment in the way we think. So we're trying to work with people to change the way that we think about that, and to allow police to have people come in and say, but you know, Mike over here in this community, he's someone that people talk to, and he will be able to help you, where they may not be able to say that because of some stigma, but maybe you would know. And that's what we're trying to do.
I want to talk a little bit about body cams in a second, but as long as we're talking about trust, this kind of overlaps. In the way that the recent body camera footage was released by police, and how the city council saw the full tape before the public saw it, even before a judge saw it, that resulted in some people in the community not only criticizing the police and accusing them of not being transparent, but also you.
Yes.
And other members of Charlotte City Council. Was that criticism fair?
Yes, it was fair, but I can only say what happened, and I'll say it consistently, because, when you speak truth, you don't have to worry about what you said the day before or the day after. And what happened that day is that we saw something that we didn't know was any different, and we saw that, myself and the council saw that in a setting that we were required to keep it confidential, because all of this is so, I wish the community could understand every restraint that we actually have, legal restraint, personnel restraint, and we were trying to do our very best, and we didn't know that what we saw was different than what was released until the media saw it. And I'm going to say that. And I believe that was inadvertent. I don't believe that there was any negative intent, but it happened. And so the criticism, I accept and understand. I would hope that people would also know all of us well enough that it wasn't negative intent to do that. And then once we knew that there was a difference, we were between that rock and a hard place of confidentiality, especially around legal liability. And I know that that's just a hard thing to accept. But at the same time, going forward, we fixed it. Today, you could see that our policy has changed. Every single video in any case will go to the judge for review and release. And think about that. In another place, that might have taken a year to happen. It may have been something that never would have happened. You know, you see
What will that mean to the public at large? The next time something like this happens, every nanosecond of footage from all the body cameras, all the dash cameras, will be released to a judge for review, and what happens then?
And then the same process under state law will occur. The judge will decide what to release that would be in the public interest. And then once that is given to our police chief, he will show it, if applicable, to the families involved, and then he will release it to the media. And that's what's going to be different.
The city, and you alluded to this a few minutes ago, the city sets aside about $30,000 a year for community organizations focusing on life skills and conflict resolution, because a lot of the problems that we're having are people resorting to using a gun to settle a conflict that 20 years ago would have been a fist fight, or maybe just common sense would have caused them to walk away or something, I don't know. Is that money, given what's happening and the rising homicide rate, is that money well spent or money wasted?
It's not just the $30,000 that goes out the door. We have police officers within the department, people that go out and work on this. Chief Putney has been out with his program on bridge building for a year. So that's, every time you look at it, it's not just the $30,000, it's how we deploy people to our communities. Was it well spent? Yes, I do believe that. Were these things that we could have prevented? We don't know. And we will try to figure that out for our city. And once we do that, you'll see increased initiatives. I don't know what they're going to be today, but I expect with the way that we're approaching things in neighborhoods, we're going to learn a little bit more. It may be more about how we light our streets. I mean, it may be more about how we design and impact our housing plans. I don't know what it will be, but whatever we think we can try, we will do it. It's essential. You know, our growth is wonderful. But if our growth isn't helping us solve problems that we have, then it's just not what we need to be doing. We need to be focused on what's most important, and that's safety in our city.
Charlotte is exploring a possibility, or policy rather, that's been described as controversial because it would change the makeup of single-family neighborhoods. We're going to do a whole hour on this tomorrow, but I want to get your take on this. The aim is to boost affordable housing and to address our history of racial segregation in housing. And city planners are exploring this possibility of ending single-family zoning. So you could have a neighborhood that has a single-family house and then a duplex or a triplex, or maybe even something bigger in that same neighborhood.
Yes.
What's your take on that? Where do you stand?
Look at Dilworth, right through it. Aren't there quadruplexes next to single family? Aren't there duplexes? In one of our most established neighborhoods, Foxcroft, there are duplexes on the corners. We are just trying to capture a way to have people have affordability at every price point. And we have pretended as if this is something new, when I think if you read Jane Jacobs from back in New York City, where she said front porches are the most important thing that you can do to build community, we're talking about the opportunity to put more housing in more communities. So yeah, I'm absolutely supportive of this.
And that's not going to change the character of neighborhoods?
I think it will change it for the better. I think that some of our most prized neighborhoods reflect that.
And the city planning director, Taiwo Jayoba, says they're considering something along the lines of what Minneapolis has done. What has Minneapolis done?
Minneapolis, I have to tell you, I read the mayor's report on it, and they went through a very long engagement, and they decided to include duplexes and triplexes. There were some ideas about doing additional work that they didn't have consensus on, and they built around where they did have those consensus. And I think that what Minneapolis did is much of what you'll see our planning team come forward to actually help us build a city for everyone and a community that people can believe in.
How does this make housing more affordable or more equitable? How does it address the injustices that we have perpetuated due to housing inequities that have resulted from zoning?
You know, many of our community groups have been having book studies around the color of law, and it addresses the issues of redlining. And I tell people there was a house across from Johnson C. Smith that would probably look like a house in Myers Park, but when redlining occurred and you needed to repair your home, you couldn't go to a bank and say, oh, on Beatties Ford Road, I've got this beautiful mansion that I want to do. You had to turn it into apartments and duplexes. And that's what we're trying to get to. And it's not a negative. It's actually saying and recognizing segregation has had an impact on so many threads of our culture and our life and our lives in our community. So what the impact would be is to make it possible for the communities to come back with ways that more design of multifamily can be inserted into single family, and I think that's a good thing.
We had that author, by the way, Richard Rothstein,
Yeah.
author of The Color of Law, on our program. You can go to our website at WFAE.org and find that entire hour to listen to if you want to hear more about what he has.
I would encourage everyone to do that. If you're in a book club and you're living in a suburban community or outside, please take a look at that book. Talk about it. I think it's something that we all need to understand, just like our Economic Opportunity Report. That's another really good read.
Charlotte Mayor Vi Lyles, Marcus Jones, the city manager for Charlotte. Aren't you glad you weren't part of this last part?
Thank you.
Thank you for the hour.